Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. Thanks everyone for organizing this. This is really nice how it's come together, and it's great to see people, even though we can't do it in real life. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about a tool I've been working on that I call shaping. But first, I want to talk a little about what I mean by geographical imagination systems. So Luke Bergmann and I have been developing this concept of geographical imagination systems. And one of the central questions we're asking it is, what if GIS were built upon the epistemological and ontological commitments that tend to motivate contemporary human geography in particular, or even on the interpretive, social sciences, and theoretical arts and humanities more generally? And so, for example, in human geography, people produce rich descriptions of space, describing it as relational, processual, paradoxical, topological. So we ask, why should we settle for the kind of narrow mathematical descriptions of space that are offered by GIS as we know them? And furthermore, what are the expressive possibilities for cartography when we treat space as an always unfinished matter of concern? And so we're thinking of geographical imagination systems as kind of this broader umbrella under which geographic information systems, as we know them, might fall. And so here we're trying to expand the functionality, the grammars, the possibilities of GIS as we know them into this broader realm of lowercase GIS. And we're inspired by a lot of work, in particular Joanna Drucker's work on speculative computing. She writes, we define speculative computing to push subjective and probabilistic concepts of knowledge as experience. It's partial, situated, and subjective. Again, subjective and mechanistic claims for knowledge as information, total, managed, and externalized. And I think capital GIS often falls into this latter category of total, managed, and externalized. But through our computing experiments, we want to think of knowledge as experience, or subjective ways of knowing. And to those ends, we built an earlier prototype geographical imagination system that we called Enfolding. We have a chapter on it. You can email me if you want a copy of that. And Enfolding allows users to go in and redefine distances within one or across multiple maps. And so some of the things that have come out of that are images like this. So this is redefining distance in terms of travel times. This is the trip from Madison to Colorado Springs for NACIS, and thinking about how air travel pinches spaces and makes them closer together as opposed to other forms of travel. We might also, one thing we did in Enfolding is think about these economically or technologically mediated wormholes that come from trade connections, or in this case, a drone strike, and how that brings faraway places close together, which force us to rethink what we mean by distance. Right? And so in this new prototype, shaping, I wanted to kind of build on what we were doing in Enfolding, but think more about how the user could directly sculpt a map, or directly manipulate space in some sense. So for instance, shaping allows us to sculpt space, tear it, and then also perform algorithmic expansions. And in a minute, I'll explain that and show some examples of shaping in action and see what we can do with it. I'm also thinking about geographical imagination systems, which are in this middle column, and how they fit into this workflow and ecosystem of cartographic work as we know it. So both of these are web-based tools. We're trying to make these accessible to people. So you could start with one of them and just output straight from them without having to know anything about GIS or design software. But we're also, also thinking about how they integrate with various types of software. So how you could go from, say, shaping to QGIS, back to shaping, and then out to Illustrator or Blender or some other sort of program. And so in what follows here, I'm going to talk about specifically this workflow from shaping as a tool and how it connects to QGIS and then can output. And for those of you who know cartographic workflows, it's not a far leap to understand how other design software become part of this workflow. And so one function starting out in shaping you might want to do is build a grid. And then you can move these control points around. And so this is a screenshot of this tool working in a browser, kind of planning out a map to be stretched or bent in various ways. So moving these control points. And then you can start sculpting the space of the map. So taking those control points and using them to stretch areas. Here I'm thinking of, how might I want to expand the street networks of Louisville and Lexington in Kentucky so they're more apparent on the map. We might be able to see them better in our final product here. So just stretching things out a bit. One thing I haven't implemented yet, but is on the list of things to do, is to build algorithmic expansions. So there are a number of scholars who have suggested different ways to do these expansions. On the left is this great paper on literary geographies and how it inspires different algorithmic means to expand these areas. And on the right, it's this focus, glue, and context approach. So I'm going to implement those into shaping. And you can also tear the map in shaping. So you can take these control points and break them apart. Here I'm tearing apart part of downtown Oakland, which I'll talk about in a later slide and show you what that's about. But here's the function in the software. And then you can enter the lat long, minimum, maximum in the software and export as GeoJSON line string pairs or ground control points. And for those of you who are following along or know a lot about projections, you can understand I'm making some assumptions about projections here. And then we can take that GeoJSON line string pair and using this vector bender plugin in QGIS and using those line strings to mimic that bending I did in the web interface. So there, if you saw it, Lexington expanded the same way as I defined in the web interface. And so here are those two images side by side where you can see that expansion happen. And so we've gone from this web tool, we could have gone straight out to a map, but we can also go back to QGIS and expand our vectors. You can do the same with the ground control points using a georeferencer to match, say a hillshade to this modification you made. One thing I do not know how to do, which I'll be checking the Slack to answer your questions later, but I don't know how to make a cut in GIS. And so if you have any ideas about that, how I could translate some sort of geographic file into GIS to make cuts, that would be awesome. Let me know. One possibility is this HyperProj project that Luke Bergmann and David O'Sullivan have suggested in this 2017 paper about building new sorts of ways of producing projections. And so that might be a possibility. We'll see. Open to other ideas. And so in the I guess like 2 minutes I have left, I want to show you some ideas I have for types of things you could do with shaping. One is, this expansion of certain areas that I talked about. So just a very practical application where we want to see dense areas better on a map. I think it could be good for that. And here's sort of an initial prototype I put together in QGIS. And you see Louisville and Lexington are expanded their street networks there. One thing I was thinking is, what are the possibilities for mental mapping in this? And I want to point to my colleague Jack Giesking's work in his new book, A Queer in New York, where a lot of the data he collects is people drawing mental maps. So in this very direct interface where you can mush space around, like maybe there's a possibility for producing these mental maps, but then also interpreting them. Here's another map, and here I was thinking of the I-980 that goes, that cut through downtown Oakland, and literally tearing neighborhoods apart, right? So it reified existing patterns of segregation and mirrors these HOLC redlining maps that maybe a lot of you are familiar with. And so it's one example of this racist history of urban planning in the US. Maybe a tear is an expressive way to show how that works. And in doing these tears, I was also thinking about Megan Kelly's amazing work on feminist approaches to mapping borders. And so what if the tear was this way to kind of expand on that work, thinking about how borders produce these different geographies and make us rethink adjacency, right? And so here's just a quick mock-up I made in shaping, tearing the Syrian border that, if you look at the slide, someone says no one or nothing goes in and out. And if no one or nothing goes in or out, maybe these two spaces that we think of as adjacent on the map aren't as adjacent as they might be. And so, you know, through these examples, those are just some of my ideas, but I think the most exciting thing is to hear about what other people imagine they could do with a tool like this, and to hear what kind of geographical imaginations do you want to bring to fruition with this tool or something related to it. So thanks a lot, and I'll hop over into the Slack and try to answer any questions, or maybe there's time for some right now. Thanks, everyone.
That was fascinating, Nick. Thank you so much. And actually, you get the prize for asking the group a question instead of the group asking you a question. So kudos to you for that, thinking out of the box. I have a question. The map that you're kind of describing seems like it might have a cool application for terrains of accessibility. So if somebody is dependent on a smooth sidewalk or accessible curb cuts, could they use this kind of thing to shape their campus map based on the accessibility?
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea. And yeah, one of the things that has been super generative in doing this work is when people come with an idea and say, you know, I want to do this, can I do it? And then they say, oh, it needs this or that, right? So yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. So thinking about all these bordering events that happen in everyday life that really make a cut in how we, you know, engage with space, and everyone would have a different map, right? What kind of bordering events prevent you from moving to various spaces? So yeah, I think that's
so interesting.
idea.
That's the cool thing about NACIS is all these crazy brains get together and start mixing around ideas, and I love it.